Should we start?
Sure.
Yeah. नमस्कार आप सभी को. On behalf of Vibha and Vigyan Prasad, I welcome you all to the 9th lecture of the series on the theme Swatantrata, Sangram and Vigyan. Year 2021 is the 75th year of India's independence from the colonial rule. And to commemorate this monumental occasion, Vigyan Bharati, Vibha, jointly with Vigyan Prasad, is organizing a lecture series on the theme Swatantrata, Sangram and Vigyan as a part of the Swatantrata Ka Amrit Mahotsav, Vigyan Bharati's celebration of the 75th year of India's independence. Indian scientists have contributed a lot to the Swatantrata Sangram in their own scientific ways, but it has not been considered as a contribution. This lecture series will help us in better understanding their contribution to the India's freedom struggle. Today, we have with us guest of honor and the speaker for today, Professor Subhash Kak, Regents Professor, Computer Science Department, Oklahoma State University, USA, and the event will be presided by Dr. Laxman Singh Rathore, former Director General of Indian Meteorological Department, New Delhi, and my colleague, Dr. Diksha Gupta, who's hosting the program along with me. The listeners can ask the questions at the end of the session, and they can type in their questions in the live chat box on the YouTube channel and Facebook. I now request my colleague, Dr. Diksha Gupta, to formally introduce our speaker and the guest of honor. Dr. Diksha Gupta, you may please take over.
Thank you, Dr. Pathak. What is holding back Indian science is one of the most appropriate and timely topic to discuss what happened to us after India's independence. Did we further build on the strong foundation we received from the scientific giants in pre-independence era like Jagdish Chandra Bose, Praful Chandra Ray, Satyendra Nath Bose, Meghnad Saha, C.V. Raman, to name more, Ramanujan, Yellapragada Subbarao? Did India leverage its full potential? Do we have an ecosystem to harness the potential of millions of bright minds in this country? So many questions. What is that we need to do differently? If we want to do course correction, shall we review our glorious past and find cues and footprints, direction for future? There cannot be a better time and place and people to have this must-to-have discussion today. So it's my honor and privilege to introduce our today's distinguished speaker, Professor Subhash Kak, and presider, Dr. Laxman Singh Rathore. Professor Subhash Kak is an Indian-American computer scientist and a historical revisionist. He is the Regents Professor of Computer Science Department at Oklahoma State University, Stillwater. Also an honorary visiting professor of engineering at JNU, Jawaharlal Nehru University. He has been associated with top institutions, and to name a few like IIT Delhi, TIFR Bombay, Harvard, Imperial College of London, and many more. He holds PhD in electrical engineering from IIT Delhi in 1970. He's also a member of Indian Prime Minister's Science, Technology and Innovation Advisory Council. In 2019, the Government of India awarded him the Padma Shri, the fourth highest civilian award in India. Professor Kak has published on the history of science, the philosophy of science, ancient astronomy, and the history of mathematics. So to name a few books which I am really amazed to see, the Astronomical Code of Rig Veda, Mind and Self, Patanjali's Yoga Sutra and Modern Science, The Nature of Physical Reality, The Fishing Tree, Presence and Promise of India. So this was very brief introduction of Professor Kak, and if I start talking about all his contribution and recognition, probably we will finish like the whole hour here. And before I hand over mic to Professor Kak, I will also go to have a brief introduction of our distinguished presider today, Dr. Laxman Singh Rathore. So he was born in Rajasthan, India, and he is an Indian scientist, former Director General of India Meteorological Department, New Delhi, and permanent representative of India with World Meteorological Organization, United Nations. Dr. Rathore has joined India Meteorological Department in the year 1980 as meteorologist, and he is an agrometeorologist and played a leading role in setting up the weather-based agricultural advisory service in India. He served as vice president of Commission of Agriculture Meteorology, World Meteorological Organization, United Nations. He is acclaimed weather forecaster. He has communicated all happenings about Cyclone Felin and Cyclone Hudhud to media, saving lives and properties. He retired from the services in the end of 2016. He is member of Executive Council of WMO, chairman of SARC Meteorological Research Center, and he participated in Indian scientific expedition to Antarctica in 1983-84 as well. He has numerous recognition, awards, honor, contribution, and just briefly, a couple of more seconds I would want to highlight, and without that, I would not be moving ahead further. So even after retirement from active service of Government of India, he's making immense contribution to society through his role as member, advisory committee, National Disaster Management Authority, GOI, international consultant of World Bank, so much so forth. And he's also Vigyan Bharati's and on various committees of Government of India. Considering his vast experience in weather and climate prediction, early warning of extreme weather events, the World Bank has appointed Dr. Rathore as international consultant to assist the bank in improving weather and climate services in South Asia. So with this brief introduction of Dr. Rathore and also a brief introduction of Professor Kak, now I hand over mic to Professor Kak for such an interesting expert discussion, which we will have in next a few minutes. Over to you, Professor Kak.
Thank you, Diksha ji. Thank you, Mallika ji, and so delighted that Laxman Singh Rathore ji will be or is presiding over this event. The question is, what is holding India back, if India is really being held back, and where or what direction should we be going if the direction needs to be changed, right? So this is the question. Now, if we look back and go to 70 years prior, when India became independent, India was the leading scientific nation of Asia. Definitely, you know, India had won Nobel Prizes. There were giants whose name have already been taken, who are still remembered as pioneers in fundamental areas of science. You know, J.C. Bose is now credited with being the first person to use wireless. IEEE has recognized it, even though Marconi won the Nobel Prize in 1901, but really J.C. Bose should have gotten it. And then we have S.N. Bose, Bose-Einstein statistics. All the elementary particles in physics are either called bosons after S.N. Bose, or they're called fermions after Enrico Fermi of Italy. So, you know, India owns half the elementary particles. Wonderful to think. And all the other names, C.V. Raman, and of course, one of the greatest mathematicians of all time, Srinivas Ramanujan, and all that. So we were certainly the leading nation in Asia and one of the nations that counted on the world stage itself. Perhaps after 47, the individuals have made great contributions in their personal capacity, and even as organizations, we have done some great work. ISRO, for example, comes to mind, and many others. But certainly, we are lagging behind other Asian nations, the Japanese, the Koreans, and now even the Chinese, who 30 years ago were probably behind us, have overtaken us. And so the question arises, what is it that the Chinese are doing well and which we are not doing well? All right. Now, the answer to this is rather complicated. And I want to go back, since the title of the series is Swatantrata Sangram or Vigyan. तो हम स्वतंत्रता संग्राम की ओर अगर अपनी दृष्टि लगाएं, तो सबसे पहले ये बात आती है कि what is it that caused India to become poor? The first thing, because economists know that when the British completely conquered India, 1817 was when the Marathas were defeated. 1800, India's share of the world economy was 25%. By 1918, the First World War, it had dropped to 1.4% of the world economy. And there was a kind of a rebound because the British needed help in war, in the war preparation, etc. And then by the time they left, I think it was 2 or 3%. And now maybe it's 5%. So it's still nowhere near where we were in 1800. So what is it that really happened? Well, I mentioned 1817. In 1817, something else also happened, something that was to have a lasting influence on India's history over the next 150 years or so, or maybe it still has a great influence on India. And that was that an employee of East India Company named James Mill wrote a book which was sort of adopted by the British as a guide to rule India. And that book was called History of British India, 1817, James Mill, adopted by East India Company to train its people, and it's also adopted by ICS to train people who wanted to go into the Indian civil service. So in that book, James Mill argued that India had no culture. Indians were mendacious, they couldn't be trusted, their understanding of science was nothing. And in fact, Macaulay, whose note was instrumental in adoption of English as the language for Indian administration and rule and everything else, called this book by James Mill, History of India, as the greatest history book written since Gibbon's book on Roman Empire. So the reason why Macaulay said that, well, India has all the knowledge of India will fit maybe one shelf of a book in a library, one shelf in a library, right? Compared to all the stuff that Europe had created. So this is something that was then drilled home to Indians again and again. And now I must also tell you that James Mill bracketed both Indians and Chinese in the same category, that they had nothing, they had no sciences, no culture, and so on. And they needed to be civilized, which is why Rudyard Kipling, the English novelist who grew up in India, called the civilizational mission of the British white man's burden. So Indians have after all these decades, adopted or accepted this primarily, at least in the public sphere. And if you read Dharampal's The Beautiful Tree, he argues that India's literacy rate before the coming of the British was probably 60-70%. And this is extrapolating from the records and the narratives that the British superintendents of education left when they traveled through different parts of India. And by the time the English were done in 1947, that literacy rate had dropped to 10%. And all the existing institutions were gone. And Indians lost Atma Vishwas and Atma Samman. So Indians concluded that the only way, and this is the reason why we are speaking in English, the only way to development was the English language, right? And in fact, there are leaders of Indian industry and business and the public sphere who believe that English is the way, and that is our advantage against, say, Chinese and the Japanese and other nations. And this, in my view, is the real problem. My view is that before you can be Atmanirbhar, you have to have Atmavishwas. And before Atmavishwas, you have to be connected back to your own tradition. So you need to have Atmasamman. Now, what we have done is we want to be Atmanirbhar without doing the other two, because in India, we don't teach anything about Indian science to our students. There's no single course on history of Indian science, either in school or college. So everybody believes, all the people who go through in the Indian education system believe that all the sciences that we are connected to, and we do live in the scientific age, arose in Europe, when in reality, as any historian of science will tell you, in reality, the foundations of modern science are based on the contributions that India made, not only indirectly, as in the creation of quantum mechanics, where one of the two creators of quantum mechanics, Erwin Schrödinger, Austrian Vedantin, claimed that the Mahavakya of the Upanishads, I am Atma Brahma, was the idea which gave him the central notion of quantum mechanics related to superposition. Or if you look at formal machine theory, which is logic, mathematical logic, where Mary Boole, the wife of one of the three creators of mathematical logic theory or formal machine theory on which computers are based, wrote that these ideas came indirectly from India, Navya Nyaya, which is equivalent to mathematical logic, which was done in India about 1,000 years ago. And George Everest, who was the Surveyor General of India and lived in India for many, many decades, used to come back to London, and all these three creators of formal mathematical theory were a part of his salon, part of his discussion group. And of course, if you go prior to that, you have the very birth of the scientific age or scientific revolution is laid at the door of the creation of infinite series and calculus by Newton and Leibniz. But now historians know that a couple of hundred years prior to that, in Kerala, infinite series were used in the creation of what is called Kerala School of Mathematics and Astronomy. And there are some historians who argue that these ideas went through the Jesuits to Europe, and they were to play a critical role in the development of thinking. And such development does take a long time, which ultimately led to the scientific revolution. So a lot of wonderful stuff. Last but not the least, we do know from the accounts that Nikola Tesla left, and even Swami Vivekananda. The meeting that Tesla and Vivekananda had in 1898 in New York, where Vivekananda told Tesla that, look, according to Indian physics, and he was speaking of Vaisheshik Sutras of Kannada, that it should be possible to convert matter into energy. So why don't you investigate that? And we do know that Tesla was not able to do it, but there is at least one group of scholars who believe that Tesla, as you know, was a Serbian, and Einstein's first wife was Serbian, and Tesla was the most famous Serbian of his time. And it's possible that this focus on trying to look for a mathematical basis to the conversion of energy and mass, therefore indirectly, these are all, of course, very indirect things, may have had something to do with Vaisheshik Sutras via Vivekananda and Tesla. Now, what India embraced, let me step back once again. It's very appropriate to accept that language doesn't really matter, and English has also become a kind of an Indian language. certainly 3, 4, 5% of Indians are as fluent at English as anybody else. And nobody wants to turn back the pages of history. And so it'll be perfectly, it's all right to emphasize English and to do it as well and teach it as well as one can. But what I'm focusing on is the whole question of creativity. We live in an age where creativity is going to be more important than ever. And for creativity, what you require is intuition. And for intuition, there have been many studies which have shown that if you learn science in your mother tongue, then in some sense you are connected to your intuition in a much more vital and fundamental way. In fact, all the great Indian scientists that we spoke about in the first half of the 20th century, they were also connected to our own mother tongues, our own Indian tongues. In fact, as you know, S.N. Bose was a great supporter of teaching of science in Indian languages and in Bengali, and he also wrote in Bengali. So, and when we look at the US and all the wonderful things that have taken place, let's say in information technology and computer science and so on, many of these contributions have been made by high school students or college dropouts. And you grow up with doing all of this because it's a part of what you do. In other words, science or doing computer programming, etc., it's a part of what you're doing in school, and therefore you are able to, it's a part of your intuition, so to speak, and you want to go beyond what others have done. So it's not always that the biggest contributions are made at the university. Some of these things are done by individuals. Now, what has happened is with only a 4 or 5% base of people who could be considered to be totally fluent at English, for whom you could consider that, well, if they're not monolingual, they're certainly bilingual. Maybe they also know some Indian languages, but certainly they feel most comfortable in English. But they're not necessarily, as perhaps the elite, they're not necessarily the ones who are going to be doing the battle that is required to be done when it comes to creative works, or creating technology, or creating science. So it's for that reason that even though India probably produces the world's largest number of trained people in IT, programming, etc., at the world stage, in the quality of our stuff, we are only at the same level as a small or mid-sized European nation. And so to step back and look at the differences, why is it that the Asian nations or European nations are doing so much better? Because they are taught sciences in their native, in their mother languages, mother tongues. Even European nations, even Nordic nations, where people are literally bilingual, where almost everybody knows Swedish or Norwegian as well, but they are taught sciences in their own, in addition to English. They know English almost as well, but they are taught sciences and mathematics and computer programming in their own mother tongues, as are people in Central Europe, like Czechoslovakia, certainly all the Slavic countries, Ukraine, Russia, and Asian countries like the Chinese, the Koreans, and the Japanese, each teach their children sciences in their mother tongue. In India, if you want to do programming, you have to first learn English. And that, I think, is a horrible, horrible mistake. You need to, I'm not an anti-English person. Yeah, teach English as well as you can, but open up the doing of programming in everybody's mother tongue. You might be using whatever symbols. You might be using symbols of the Roman alphabet or the English alphabet, which are only symbols. But it should be the programming should be taught in our mother tongues. Because after all, programming, what is programming? Programming is a kind of mathematical subject. It's math and logic taken together. And these were the two fields in which India was number one for centuries. I already mentioned Navya Nyaya. Navya Nyaya, which is equivalent to mathematical logic, which Europe, let's say they rediscovered it. They rediscovered it only 150 years ago. While in India, this was done a thousand years ago. And math, as we all know, zero, and I also mentioned very briefly Kerala School of Mathematics, where calculus was done a couple of hundred years prior to Europe. So mathematics, Indians are outstanding at mathematics. And so we need to make this change and make computer programming and information technology accessible to people in each mother tongue, in all of the Indian languages. I think that would be a positive step. The other positive step, now, often given that the unique peculiar history of India over the last 70 years, where in part we were afraid or fearful that just as the East Indian Company was able to dominate India in such a short time and eventually conquer it, we should create our own science and technology. We should, not right after 1947, we should do our own industry, etc. And we tried it for a few decades, but we were not that efficient, and eventually the markets had to be opened up, and India is doing much better. And Indians by themselves all over the world are extremely successful. As you know, Indians are the most successful ethnic group in the US, more successful than the Chinese, the Japanese, the Koreans, the Jews, the Europeans. Indians are the wealthiest group, we do know, and they have made an impact in every field, including politics. We know that the Vice President of the United States is half Indian, so that's wonderful. But that's only symbolic. So we had that fear, but then that fear was something associated with our history. So it took us some time to open up. But after we opened up in the 90s, the leaders of Indian technology saw very clearly that the growth was going to take place in the computer-related sciences, and they said, what we are going to do is focus on the back office, and perhaps history repeats itself. This is what had happened in the 1700s when the British set up their factories, let's say in north of Chennai, Fort St. George, where they were doing stuff. They were deciding what had to be done. And the back office were these Indians holding these ledgers and keeping accounts. So the leaders in India, leaders of science and technology in the 1990s said, we are going to be the back office to the world. And for some time it worked. And so Indian software industry has done well. But all of that is going to become irrelevant because of AI, because everything is getting automated. And those jobs are going to be of less and less value. Although there would be Indians working as contractors all across the world, so body shopping, if you will. Now, in contrast to this decision, and this was knee-jerk related to India's history, because of our lack of Atma-Vishwas, we thought we could not compete in the creation of products. The Japanese, right after the Second World War, when Japan was totally devastated after 2 atom bombs and everything else, they said, we are very disciplined people. We are as smart as anybody, just as Indians are as smart as anybody, which we have proven all over the world. And our history is a testament to that. The Japanese said, we're going to work very hard. And very soon, in just 10, 15 years, they had conquered the automobile industry, which was a big segment of the economy of all the developed nations. And their cars were the most efficiently done and well designed. And then the Koreans followed that, and they had verticals. They had these companies, and they had total freedom to innovate and work hard. And that's a part of a kind of a national mission. We want to do this and succeed. The Koreans did the same. They followed the Japanese, and then they said, we are also going to be doing shipbuilding, or we are going to be doing um, ICs and so on. And so they did that. And the Chinese, after, because of the way they are governed by the Communist Party, in the beginning, they wanted to do it their own way. They discovered that it led to nothing but famine and so on. The famine of the 50s and 60s. Finally, they said, we're going to give our leaders free play, although the Communist Party is at the top. But within the country, it will be a kind of a capitalist system, and the companies will have freedom to innovate. And all these smart people, Chinese who had gotten the degrees from the West, went back and set up these companies. And now the Americans are finding it difficult to compete with them, even though American universities are the very best. You look at any sector, what has happened is that the Chinese have made it a national mission to succeed, and they walled up the internet. They created their own products, and their products, such as TikTok, have also conquered the rest of the world as a social media company, while India doesn't have any such product. We are still talking of English as an advantage. That's total nonsense. The Chinese are also learning English in school. We are not against English, but sciences must be done in our own languages. That's very important. Without that, we won't have the confidence to take the initiatives that are needed. Now, of course, India has invested a lot in colleges and labs and so on, and that's all nice. And India is doing well in production of scientific knowledge within the parameters that I've already mentioned. But that's not where industrial products are made. As a scientist, I may have a brilliant idea, but you need a different ecosystem, as was mentioned. For ecosystem, you need many other parameters, and you need different kinds of skills. A startup can only go that far. Now, of course, America is a nation of startups, but after you have your idea and you have come up with a working model, or at least a working concept, ultimately what is done is that experienced managers are hired, people who have shown that they have the experience of creating companies. They are hired by the startups, and then they take the thing forward. Now, I think it's sort of naive in India, at least for some people, to believe that if only you had startups at IITs and other places, then these people will be able to take these ideas and take them to the world level. I think what is required is to just as follow the successful model, the Japanese, the Koreans, and the Chinese. Okay, we want to succeed, or the Indians, let's say ISRO. We want to succeed. You have to give free play to industry leaders, proven managers. So you bring in all the leaders and say that we want to create world-class products in IT. We want to have, the Europeans are trying to have their own search engine. One could make an argument that all the data that the IT companies collect, or social media companies collect, give them a certain advantage, and there could be certain security and other reasons. Certainly, the Germans and the French have said for their governmental work, they want their own search engines to be used, or you can't use social media such as Facebook if it's governmental work, etc. And this is just to give some kind of a help to their own companies to come up. So how should we do that? history repeats, but it doesn't repeat exactly the same way as it occurred the first time. So how should India, first of all, have the confidence to articulate these questions? Because one way to do it is that, okay, चीजें तो हो रही हैं और हमारे पास ये सारी companies हैं तो ये चलती रहेंगी, and that there may be some in some areas that might be fine, but if you want to, first of all, make a claim to world leadership, which I believe in science and technology itself. There's no reason why, if the Chinese want to be the best in the world, why can't Indians want to or dream to be the best in the world? Not at everything, because we are also interconnected. We are also a global village, and we should also think of humanity as a whole. But certainly, in order to provide jobs for a billion people, a billion plus people, we need to do more than just follow what Western companies are doing. We need to make a stake ourselves, or stake out ourselves, that this is the way we would do it. And we would do it in ways which maybe other Western nations, which have their own problems now, as we know, the trade deficit, etc. America is extremely wealthy, the wealthiest nation in the history of mankind, but it's doing it off every other nation's back, because America right now is just printing money like crazy, and since a dollar is the world currency, every nation is sending stuff and people also to the US, but maybe the system will come crashing down. We don't know. And then we have the challenge of AI. AI is going to render more and more jobs redundant. If there are no jobs, we need to make use of human creativity and not just do office work, because the Indian paradigm has been, we'll do office work of one kind or the other. Either we are doing office work for ourselves, or factories that have been set up in India in collaboration with companies outside. Then we work in the office and work on the office shop floor, or we're doing back office work for Western companies. But that will not suffice, because a lot of such office work will go away. Just as 20 years ago, there were thousands of travel agents. Now, nobody needs a travel agent, because everybody does it oneself, because there are computer programs which guide you on the internet. Look at education. India should have been world educator. Indians are some of the world's greatest lecturers also, even in the US or in Europe. And that itself is going to be impacted. Why? We don't need hundreds of thousands of professors. Maybe just a few great professors, or this is a challenge. I'm not saying we won't need people, but this would be a challenge, that for less expensive delivery of education, just a few professors, online courses would be a greater and greater component. And so given that, what India needs to focus on, not just by looking at the experience of the past few years, but also, I think this is the most important thing, I believe, for all Indian science leadership, to see, okay, before others think of these problems, where is world economy going, or where is Indian economy going in relation to science and technology? So what is it where we can think of possibilities before others do? Because if we are leaders, then we will be able to come up with products which will work not only in India, but in every other country as well. So I think we have to think in those ways. And for some of those, just thinking in IITs and the labs would not be enough, because as I said, you need experienced managers and leaders to take ideas from their conception to product development. But in any event, product development is going to be something that we need to focus on in India. And just as I mentioned, just in education, maybe India could be the leader in looking at a hybrid model, online and this. So how do we do it? If we can do it efficiently in India, maybe you can go all over the world. You look at Um, last 70 years after the Second World War, when this great expansion of the college and the university system took place, not only in India, but in the West as well, with all these beautiful campuses that were set up where Indians, like other people from other nations, are spending a lot of money sending their children to colleges in Australia and Europe and Germany and Britain and USA, and education is becoming more and more expensive. In a private school, per year costs are about $60,000 to $80,000 in the US right now. So if they were education leaders, and this is just an example, and this example could be replicated in almost all fields, they were thinking about how do we do it. Now, one of the problems that India faces there is the Indian connection to its colonial history. We were talking about SWATANTRATA SANGRAM. Colonial history, the way our constitution is we need fundamental reforms, because we are tinkering, and tinkering is fine, and some of that has been going on for many years, but we also need fundamental reforms. Just as a symbolic case, of 70 years after independence, no Indian language can be used in India's Supreme Court to argue a case. India's Supreme Court does not allow any language but English. हम अभी भी दास देश हैं, जब तक ये नहीं बदलेगा कि ठीक है आप अंग्रेजी को नहीं फेंकिए, बात छोड़िए, अंग्रेजी में भी लोग बात कर सकते हैं, लेकिन why not any other Indian language? Also, look at European Union. All European languages can be used there. So we also have to make these symbolic actions. We have to allow people to feel pride at India with this amazing culture and history in sciences and arts, incomparable. You look at Indian sculpture, architecture, and music and everything else. You know, the great modern historian of art and a great leader in India, a good friend of mine who passed away last year, Kapila Vatsyayan ji. Kapila ji once told me, and she, as you know, she was the founder of Indira Gandhi National Center for the Arts and wrote many, many books. She said, whatever the English touched in India through their universities and their education system, they destroyed. The only 3 or 4 things they did not touch are the only ones that have survived, where India is still a world leader. And what are those things that they did not touch? One was arts, including music and dance. The second was yoga. And the third was, I forget the third one, music, dance, arts, and yoga, right? That's where people from all over the world still come to India to learn. But everywhere else, we are looking over our shoulder for approval. You know, we haven't even created a world standard ecosystem in publishing. You know, every university worth the name in the West used to have its own publishing press, you know, imprint of the universities. You had that even in India. University of Lucknow Press published some great books on Indian history, or Allahabad University Press, or BHU, or University of Delhi. We have nothing. Everything, which is not to say that we don't want to be connected to the world system, but things have to be done. New things have to be created at the same time. In fact, great Indian publishing houses in the humanities, like Motilal Banarsi Das, is not the same thing anymore, because Western innovation and harnessing of internet technology, publishing itself has changed. You have digital books, and we have not been able to keep in step with all those changes. So to conclude, I want to say that Indian experience in science, technology, and development has given us a certain resilience. We should use that resilience, but we also need to make some fundamental changes. And in my view, one of the fundamental change is to not just cater to the 5% Indians for whom English has become a mother language, but not to shun them either. Okay, that is a part of our history, that's fine. And they can do English. We love English also, but not ignore the other 95%. Let all languages bloom. Let sciences be taught in all languages. Let computer programming be made accessible to everybody in villages also, so that they don't see computers as something jo Angrez hai, jo Western hai. This is as much a part of them as anybody else. So we need to make those changes. At the national level, we need to focus on certain products and follow what the Asian nations did. And now, it's not just strength in college and universities. If that was the case, then America would not become getting left behind and be unable to compete with the Chinese in more and more products. Why is America now trying to set up all these tariffs against the Chinese? Because they can't compete. Even though they may have the best universities, they may have the best scientists knowing, let's say, solar panels or this or that, but their products cannot compete. So we need to have some national missions. Okay, we want to take such and such products and inspire the leaders of our own business and technology to do and give them whatever help is needed. In the past, we used to say that these are the bad people. The business leaders are the bad people. The technology leaders are the bad people. So we have to keep them in check. I can tell you that when I was a young kid growing up in Kashmir, there was only one factory in Kashmir, and that factory produced matches, matches, Silai, Diya Salai. And there was also a quota on how many match boxes they could produce. India had this bizarre system of quotas, the government deciding everything, so many things. We have to let the business become more free so that they can then plan for the future. And I don't think we have done. There have been some wonderful loosening up in the last 5, 7, 8, 10 years, but much, much more needs to be done. We need to go with them. You need to trust the instincts of the best, because the people in the business world, the industry world, in all fields, they love India as much as anybody else, as the bureaucrats in Delhi. But you at least have to trust them, and then you can hold them accountable. But you have to give them a chance. I don't think we have done that entirely, or we've told them that, okay, now go and compete. But do they have all the parameters that they need to be able to compete, let's say, with the Chinese in products? First of all, they have to be inspired to make these products. And you don't need new technology. Look at IT. To create a social media company, you don't need new programming skills. All that stuff is there. If everybody knows it, you need management. And IT is going to become increasingly more important. Robotics, which is all about programming, is going to be more important. That's going to be game changer. And we need to focus on some of those things. And once again, just to give you an example, focus. You look at drones. The Chinese own 90% of the world drone market because they decided to make that product. And now the Americans want to get into it, but they are not able to compete. So we have to focus. We have to identify some of those things and say we want to do it as well as anybody else. And once we do that, I think Indians would be unbeatable. We have shown it. We have shown it where the playing field is level, as in the US. In the US, Indians are unbeatable. We have done so well. Look at our own children. They are doing so well in every field. So let's have faith and make it, enlarge the whole space. Not think only of those who know English. when I complained in one of my lectures, in one of my essays, that why don't we have not just the Supreme Court allowing Indian languages, but why can't people write their PhD dissertations in Indian languages? Why only English? And somebody said, what if somebody writes a dissertation in Bhojpuri? How would we find somebody to check it or investigate it? These are, these are rhetorical statements just to put India down. Okay, if somebody is so good that they've written a dissertation in Bhojpuri, we should do whatever it takes to get that examined. Or those people should also, or they would be writing their papers in international journals in whatever language. The Chinese are also writing papers in English. So are the Japanese, so are the Koreans. We're not saying don't use English. But for the young person, which is when their pragya, their intuition is where they want to look and see where they can make a difference in the world, we are putting them down. We are not giving them a chance. And the ones we are giving all the opportunities to, they are probably not interested. They're very smart too. They're probably not interested. Maybe they're interested in the arts. Maybe they're interested in learning music. They don't want to do computer programming because that's hard work, right? So we have to change all that. Well, I'll just stop with this, and perhaps we can build upon some of these threads in the questions and answers.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. It was such an engrossing talk, I can't tell you. And, sir, I must tell you, sir, just one remark, that the new education policy from the Government of India actually stresses on the fact that the teaching has to be done in regional languages. And it has been made compulsory to teach in regional languages till class 5th. So, and till class 8, optional. So, Government of India is making an effort on that part. And also, sir, even these days, the entrance examinations for IITs and medical, they are being conducted in regional languages also, besides English. So,
wonderful, wonderful. मैं अपने बारे में बताऊं, मैंने जो मेरी पढ़ाई हुई कश्मीर में, फर्श पे बैठ के, टाट के फर्श पे बैठ के, हमने सब कुछ हिंदी में पढ़ा. और मुझे तो लगता है अपने बारे में कि if at all I have an advantage, and as you know, I worked in many fields, including quantum mechanics and information and security, cyber security and other fields. That's because of my education in Hindi. मैंने अंग्रेजी अपने 10 years में सीखा, और मैंने उसको सीखा by just reading English books. So we can also be connected vitally to our most amazing. There is no literature in the world like our own Sanskrit, classical literature. तो हम लोग उससे और दोबारा क्यों नहीं जोड़ते हैं? उसका ये मतलब नहीं कि हम अपना मुख यूरोपियन भाषाओं से परे कर लें. उससे भी हम उनसे भी प्रेम कर सकते हैं, और हम अपने ही भाषा और संस्कृति से क्यों विमुख हो गए हैं? I think that is a terrible thing that we have done.
Yes, sir. In fact, sir, I can speak English, but my mother tongue is Hindi. So I feel better when I talk in Hindi. So it's much more fluent and much more easier for me to do. So before I was just skimming through the YouTube channel. Sir, before I do that, just because I'm the moderator, I'll take one chance and ask you one question. Sir, just one simple thing, sir. Do you think Indian scientists can take some inspiration from Vedas and just take a relook at them, try and be inspired and try and do something which probably Vedas have already predicted, and they can take some innovation ideas and take it further maybe?
Good question. Because sadly in India, this whole thing about going to the Vedas has become a matter of great contention. Because the moment one talks about Itihas, Puran, and all the stories about Vimans and so on, and then there are some people who stand up कि भारत में विमान थे, सब कुछ ये था, atom bomb था, hydrogen bomb था. So that is all. What that does is then it all gets ridiculed, and then all of Indian history, culture, science is put down, and they say कि ये लोग तो इतने पुरानी चीजों से जुड़े हुए हैं, they can't be modern. Now, so clearly we didn't have those things, those were imagination. So you have to put everything in perspective. Now, your question is there something about the tradition which can still be useful in dealing with the challenges of science and world science? And my answer, based on my own research, is yes. And let me explain what that is. Modern physics, which is the basis of other sciences. From physics comes chemistry, from chemistry comes biology, and so on. Modern physics is facing its greatest crisis. Modern physics, theories of gravitation, Newton's or Einstein's, cannot explain cosmology and the motions of galaxies, the rates at which they are going in the stars, etc. And that's why modern physics is being compelled to postulate 96% of dark matter and dark energy, for which there is no evidence at all. Dark matter and dark energy has not been discovered or found in any lab experiments. So 96% is being postulated as dark matter and dark energy, because that can then explain why the universe is expanding now at an accelerating rate, right? Which was discovered only 24 years ago, and people have won Nobel Prizes for that. And for that, that's why they have to postulate dark energy. Okay, and then 96% and 3.5% is supposed to be interstellar gases. So 99.5%. So all of cosmology is based on 0.5%. Now, clearly that could not be true. Well, and the answer could be maybe there is dark matter and dark energy, but the chances are that's all our imagination trying to cover up for something which is missing. In my own view, and I've published something on this, quite some papers in the leading journals in recent years, my own view is that this crisis may have a basis similar to the crisis 120 years ago, which is the crisis of atomic physics or relativity or quantum mechanics, when, as you know, Einstein was into entropy. The first, when he did thermodynamics, 1903, 1905, the whole idea of the observer came in. Entropy is associated with information. Entropy and information are in fact equivalent. In thermodynamics, it's entropy. In engineering systems, it's information. So the observer came in relativity theory. And then we already mentioned Schrodinger's name, created quantum mechanics, which is the deepest theory there is. Everything is based on quantum mechanics, as we know. Chemistry cannot be explained without quantum mechanics. So the observer comes in. I am Atma Brahma is one thing. The other element of quantum mechanics, there are two sides to quantum mechanics, is that the observer interacts with the system and collapses all that superpositions into one of the observed states. Now, so the observer needs to come in. In my view, the observer needs to be introduced even further. And that's where, because the Vedas are about Atma Vidya, they are about the observer, the science of the observer. And that's where there could be clues, even in Vaisheshik Sutras. And as you know, I've translated the Vaisheshik Sutras, and you can see it, buy it, or get it off Amazon.com or .in. The book is called Matter and Mind. And what Kanada did, and he had equations of motion as well, quite similar to Newton's, only Indians don't know it because they haven't read Vaisheshik Sutras. He also had a more central place for the observer. Now, why is that important? Well, not only from the perspective of physics, and I think looking at it more from the perspective of observer will also clarify certain paradoxes in black hole physics and so on. And I have some collaborators who do that kind of work. And in fact, we are doing some work on that as well. But it will also, and this is the frontier of science, modern science, is where does consciousness come from? Why is the brain machine conscious while the silicon machine is not conscious? What is the phenomenon of consciousness, right? And that's the heart of the Vedic sciences. What are the Vedas? Mundak Upanishad speaks of two kinds of vidyas, apara and para. Apara are the ordinary sciences of things which are described by language, right? जिसके लिए भाषा का प्रयोग किया जा सकता है. The other is Paravidya. Paravidya is the science of consciousness, which you cannot express in terms of language because language is all about things and concepts. Para or consciousness is beyond that. So there is this whole world, and I can tell you that some of the greatest scientists in the West are being inspired by it. The Vedas, not in the sense of Vimanas, etc. That is just by those who are still connected to the colonial view of India. India is also a big struggle between those whose minds are still colonized. And they are quite happy because they don't know any of this. They think this is all being imagined and made up, right? So people whose minds are colonized, they don't want to do any of this because they think this is crazy, because their knowledge is shallow. Basically, they're shallow, right? It's like James Mill saying that Indians have no culture because his knowledge was shallow. The smartest people in the West are attracted to all of this. And it is still, whether Indians do it or not, all of this Atma Vidya, through all the Indian sciences, the Shastras, which are universal sciences, is going to change the world, whether India does it or not. But certainly these sciences or these traditions are still alive. The place where they are vitally alive is India. And there are people who are doing it on their own, right? Why not make it accessible? That doesn't mean that everybody has to accept it, but this should be, it's like not everybody has to become a chemist, everybody has to become a physicist, but all of this should be made accessible someplace or the other in the Indian education system, so that those who want to investigate this further or see, the other crisis that right now modern West is wellness and health. 70, 80, 90% of all the clinical research which is published in medical journals cannot be replicated. And it's quite possible that one reason behind that might be, as we know from mathematical logic, that the binary logic is not optimal, ternary logic is. Logical analysis in categories of 3 is superior to analysis in categories of 2. And why computers are done using binary logic has a certain history, because there was technology as it evolved, but computer scientists are aware that ternary logic is superior, and they wanted to even create machines based on ternary logic, but then the infrastructural technology has reached a level where you cannot make those kinds of investments. So now I'm making the point that maybe Ayurveda should get more play because it's based on ternary logic. You have 3 doshas. And maybe there's something to it, but just saying that is not enough. You have to use the critical method. You have to stand up and say why doing that may be helpful for medicine everywhere. If you just stand up and say that ki hamari Charak Samhita ya Sushruta Samhita ya Ashtanga Hridaya mein ye hai, that's not good enough. You have to create a whole universal knowledge system so that then we show the way. So I think, therefore, to come back to your question, yes, the Vedas, Ayurveda, all of this, Vaisheshik, all of this is relevant, and it should be done in a critical way. It should once again become vital, not just where all that we are doing is history. Even in philosophy, we are just doing, we have these Shad Darshan, and people are doing history. Ki, isne kya kiya, usne Vedaranya ne kya kiya, ya Badarayan ne kya kiya, ya Karnad ne kya kiya. They should become vital once again, so that if they are relevant, they should be relevant to all of humanity. They should not just be, something Indian of relevance only for India.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. So there is a question from Dr. Bharat Pandey. What instruments of modern education should be used in the context of the development of new online media?
All instruments. And we have to be pragmatic. For example, if in India, you need machine translation also, and you have Google Translate, for example, there should be more of that available within India. Now, we should not be emotional and say, okay, we are only going to create a system based on Panini's rules. Be pragmatic, do whatever works. If you and, and so use all of the technologies, maybe database technologies. Panini's system arose because at that time there was this requirement that the scholar should be able to remember all these rules. There's 4,000 rules of Sanskrit grammar. But maybe, while that is wonderful, that could be incorporated, but maybe we need to use database systems because memory is inexpensive now, right? At that time, memory was expensive when you're looking at each human individual. So use whatever technology is required, not be emotionally connected.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. Now I request Dr. Rathore and Dr. Gupta to ask their questions from sir.
I have a question, and then I will hand over mic to Dr. Rathore. Professor Kak, you mentioned about creativity, intuition, right, and all those aspects. And one point you also mentioned, when we think our mother tongue, right, we are more creative and we get to that core where we need to be. There are 2-3 things even when I have observed, and when you were talking about that, कि स्कूल में टाट पट्टी पे बैठना अभी भी बहुत बड़ा पॉपुलेशन का सेक्शन ऐसा है कि जो ऐसे ही एजुकेटेड है, दे आर वेरी स्मार्ट ब्रिलियंट पीपल, पर इंग्लिश का वो एक बैरियर आ जाता है. तो अगर आप देखेंगे कि इकोनॉमिकली वीकर सेक्शंस में, ठीक है, डिस्पाइट कि गवर्नमेंट ने इतना एजुकेशन इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर क्रिएट किया है, सब कुछ किया है, पर इंग्लिश को लेके इतना स्ट्रॉन्ग परसेप्शन है कि लोगों को लगता है कि जब तक अंग्रेजी नहीं पढ़ेंगे तब तक उनको मतलब लाइफ में लाइवलीहुड ही नहीं मिलेगा, वो मॉडर्न नहीं है, ठीक है. तो वो एक जैसे इंग्लिश का प्रेशर कंटिन्यूअसली बना हुआ है. तो उधर क्या ऐसे एफर्ट होने चाहिए टॉप से जहां पे हम इस परसेप्शन को मिटिगेट करने के थोड़े एफर्ट करें कि अंग्रेजी बोलने का मतलब बुद्धिमानी नहीं होता है, मतलब बुद्धिमानी जो होती है उसके लिए आप कोई भी लैंग्वेज यूज कर सकते हैं और कई बार बिना लैंग्वेज यूज करे भी आप बुद्धिमानी दिखा सकते हैं. तो वो एक नैरेटिव. दूसरा, आपको क्या लगता है कि क्रिएटिविटी कॉग्निटिव है या उसको और थोड़ा सा मतलब हम ट्रेन कर सकते हैं? कैन वी ट्रेन पीपल टू बी क्रिएटिव? सो दीज आर 2 things which just came to my mind, and if you can throw some light, and then I think we can go to Dr. Rathore after that.
Let me address your second question. Creativity सिखाई जा सकती है. मेरी ये धारणा है कि every human being can be creative. हर एक के भीतर वही पुरुष है, वही आत्मा है. Every human being, no matter which part of the world, and so on. So everybody can be creative. Why is it that some people are more creative than others? Of course, we are born with different temperaments. If you're more reflexive, if you watch more, the whole idea, okay, now yoga is everywhere. The whole world is adopted yoga. But what is yoga? What is yoga? Yoga is connection with one's own one's own consciousness, if you will. जो चित्त है, चित्त is a kind of it is a sky of memories, and there is this whole stuff going on there, thoughts which are the vrittis, right? If you can calm them, if your consciousness can reflect in all its brightness in your mind, then you'll see things as clearly as is possible to see them, and therefore you'll be creative, right? Because when you see things clearly, because what is creativity? Creativity is finding the most obvious thing, which there is, which nobody else is seeing, right? They're not seeing is because everybody has got those blinkers on their eyes. And if you can remove those blinkers, so yes, so the answer to the question is we can teach everybody to be creative. And we, within India, have these sciences, like yoga is a science, or all those tantra, what would you sadhana ke different systems they, if we can make those accessible to people. And now we're not just saying कि just do it कि आपको cross-legged करके और इस प्रकार से करना है. You can do sadhana in different ways. Even music, sangeet is also a sadhana. Dance is also a sadhana. Or even sports. Pursuit of excellence is sadhana. And that's where we are lacking the most right now. Indian products, Indian ecosystem, we accept things which are not done as well as they should be. Maybe if you go to the villages, people are more connected to that pursuit of excellence than वो जो शहरी जो अंदाज है कि ठीक है कर दिया चलता है. So yes, my answer, and I truly believe in it, and I truly believe in it, that every human being can be creative. And जो दूसरा प्रश्न था कि जो ये अंग्रेजी मानसिकता है कि अंग्रेजी means superiority, I think that is our greatest handicap right now. In fact, हमारे systems ऐसे हैं, जो हीन भावना ऐसी है कि जो व्यक्ति ज्यादा चतुराई से अंग्रेजी बोलता है हम समझते हैं कि वही ज्यादा बुद्धिमान है. And that person may not be smarter. And that person, if we give him leadership, that person is putting the entire organization behind. तो हम compete नहीं कर पा रहे हैं internationally. जो लोग चीन से आते हैं या जापान से आते हैं वो लोग अंग्रेजी नहीं बोल सकते, उनके साइंटिस्ट भी नहीं बोल सकते. But we respect them because we have seen their work and we know that they are really thinking clearly. तो clarity जो है वो भाषा से नहीं. और see what has happened, and this is a big tragedy that has occurred. This focus on English जो हमारे लोग अब निकल रहे हैं, ना ही वो अंग्रेजी ठीक तरह से बोल सकते हैं और ना ही अपनी मातृभाषा ठीक तरह से बोल पा रहे हैं. And that is a very tragic thing. In fact, मैं आपको ये बता सकता हूँ कि मैंने कुछ लेख लिखे थे. तो एक भारत का लीडिंग हिंदी समाचार पत्र है, उसका नाम मैं नहीं लूंगा, तो उन्होंने मुझे लिखा कि हमारे पे वॉल है, उसके जो सब्सक्राइबर्स हैं वो हमारे कुछ लेख पढ़ सकते हैं, क्या हम आपके लेखों का हिंदी में अनुवाद कर सकते हैं? मैंने कहा जरूर. और मैंने कहा आपको मुझे कोई पैसे देने की भी आवश्यकता नहीं है. तो उन्होंने कहा ठीक है. तो उन्होंने कहा कि क्या हम आपसे सहायता ले सकते हैं, हम आपको ड्राफ्ट भेजेंगे तो आप देखिए कि इसका अनुवाद ठीक हुआ है. तो उन्होंने मुझे ड्राफ्ट भेजा, उनके अनुवादक ने. इतनी खराब हिंदी, आई वॉज शॉक. मुझे दुगना टाइम लगा उसकी हिंदी को ठीक करने में. कि ये लोग जो अब हिंदी भी लिख रहे हैं, कई लोग, मैं ये नहीं कह रहा हूं कि सब लोग, कि जो ये एक्सेलेंस के साथ कनेक्शन है, दैट इज द सेंट्रल थिंग. भाषा इज ओनली अ माध्यम कि हम कैसे दोबारा एक्सेलेंस जुड़ जाएं. और जो हमारे कलाएं थी, जैसे नृत्य है, संगीत है, उसका पर्पस क्या था कि हम एक्सेलेंस से जुड़े, कि ये इनको सीखना बहुत सरल नहीं है, आपको कई साल इनके साथ जोड़ने हैं और उसको हमें दोबारा रीगेन करना है, उस एक्सेलेंस की जो ट्रेडिशन है.
सर ये बहुत अच्छा आपने पर्सपेक्टिव दिया. इनफैक्ट मतलब अभी हालांकि हम इस टॉपिक पे बात कर रहे हैं, पर अगर आप प्रोफेशनल स्पेस में देखिए तो स्पेशली इन रिसर्च और बेसिक साइंस वगैरह में बात करें, बहुत बड़ा सेक्शन अभी भी ऐसा है उन सब बैचेस में कि जो गांव से या ग्रामीण बैकग्राउंड से ज्यादा लोग आते हैं. उन बच्चों को मेन जो ट्रॉमा या जो एक कॉम्प्लेक्स फील होता है वो इसलिए कि वो उस भाषा में बोल नहीं सकते, उस स्टाइल में बोल नहीं सकते, और उसके बाद वो ऐसा बैठ जाता है उनके मन में कि दे जस्ट फील लाइक दे आर नो गॉड. सो आई जस्ट फील कि आपने जो बोला कि रीजनल लैंग्वेजेस में होनी चाहिए, नई एजुकेशन पॉलिसी आई है, ठीक है, वो सब होते होते मुझे लगता है 2-3 जनरेशन निकल जाएंगी जब तक वो बच्चे ऊपर तक पहुंचेंगे. इज इट एनीथिंग, आई मीन ऑब्वियसली यू सिट इन डिफरेंट कमिटीज एंड द प्लेसेस, सो व्हाट आई फील द रिकमेंडेशंस एंड द थिंग कम फ्रॉम टॉप. The example people set from top really influence a lot of people. तो कहीं तो भी अवेयरनेस स्पेस में अगर हम कुछ ऐसा कर सकते हैं कि जहाँ पे इट्स जस्ट टोटली कूल टू बी लाइक दिस वे, क्योंकि वो कूलनेस क्वेश्चन भी बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट हो जाता है, एंड देन पीपल फील दैट्स मोर इन इंग्लिश. तो वो पूरा एक सेपरेट नैरेटिव है, एंड आई एम लाइक रियली इंटरेस्टेड डिस्कसिंग मोर विद यू, maybe on some other platform, and without taking further time, thank you for bringing that perspective, and that was really intriguing. Now I invite Dr. Laxman Singh Rathore ji. Please continue this discussion further.
धन्यवाद दीक्षा जी, मल्लिका जी, रंजना जी और सुभाष जी को सुनकर जिसने भी उनको सुना, मैं समझता हूँ धन्य हो गया. मैं तो हो ही गया. और पूरा परिप्रेक्ष्य आपने हमें दिया, और विज्ञान की जो पराविद्या और अपराविद्या, जो मंडूक उपनिषद से जहाँ आपने बात कही बहुत अच्छी कही, और आपने ये भी कहा कि विज्ञान अंत में सत्य की खोज करने का एक माध्यम है. और हमारे यहाँ कहा है कि सत्येन धार्यते पृथ्वी, सत्येन तपते रवि, सत्येन बहती वायुश्च, सत्येन सर्व प्रतिष्ठिता. सत्य सब जगह व्याप्त है, हमें खोज करना है। और वो खोज जो है उन विषयों में जो पराविज्ञान है, पराविद्या है, वहां पर उसकी महत्ता बहुत अधिक हो जाती है। आपने पूरा परिप्रेक्ष्य दिया, और वो देश, वो सभ्यता जो अगर आप इतिहास पूर्व काल देखें और मेडिवल पीरियड देखें और आज़ादी के ठीक पहले के काल को देखें, तो इसमें भारतीय विज्ञान जो आपने रेखांकित किया कि हम बहुत जब से सभ्यता का विकास हुआ, आप देखें कि पशुपालन विज्ञान, वेटनरी साइंस दोनों भारत में अगर कहूँ कि यहाँ से बहुत कार्य हुआ तो अतिशयोक्ति नहीं है। फिर जब हमने कृषि करना शुरू किया, और तो कृषि में जो है हमने नए आयाम स्थापित किए, वैज्ञानिक आयाम, नई नई वेराइटीज, नई नई फसलें, और क्योंकि हम जो हंटिंग वाले से जब स्थापित हुए, और उसके साथ ही सिंचाई और जल प्रबंधन विज्ञान भी। और ये तो हमारे पास में प्रमाण जो आपने कहे उसके उपलब्ध हैं। नगर योजना, गृह संरचना, जल निकासी की व्यवस्थाएं, नापतोल विज्ञान, समुद्र विज्ञान, मौसम विज्ञान, एस्ट्रोनॉमी और खगोल शास्त्र और ज्योतिष, और ये सब एप्लीकेशंस थी। लेकिन जो मूल विज्ञान है, और मूल विज्ञान में जो सिद्धांत प्रतिपादित हुए, चाहे वो गणित के हो, चाहे रसायन के हो, रसशास्त्र के हो, भौतिकी के हो, जीव विज्ञान के हो, आयुर्वेद के या सर्जरी के हो, अब उनको नए सिरे से आपने बहुत अच्छा रेखांकित किया कि हमें रेखांकित करना है। और कहीं न कहीं विज्ञान के विकास के क्रम में शिक्षा और उसका उद्योग से जुड़ाव जो है वो बहुत महत्वपूर्ण है। और मैं समझता हूं कि नवीन काल में हमसे वहीं पर चूक हुई है। संसाधन मैं नहीं समझता कि कोई बहुत बड़ा चैलेंज रहा, क्योंकि आज़ादी के पूर्व काल में जितने भी हमारे महान वैज्ञानिक हुए उनके पास कोई संसाधन थे ही नहीं, चाहे वो जगदीश चंद्र बसु हो या सीवी रामन हो या अन्य सभी। और बिना संसाधन या बिल्कुल सीमित संसाधनों से उन्होंने ऐसी खोजें की जो कि एक नए मापदंड स्थापित किए। मेरे पास कहने को बहुत कुछ नहीं, आपने पूरी बात जो है और विज्ञान के विकास में भाषा का जो महत्व है, और उसमें मल्लिका जी ने और दीक्षा जी ने भी उसको रेखांकित किया। मैं इस विषय पर थोड़ा सा कहना चाहूँगा कि नई शिक्षा नीति बनी है, और निश्चित रूप से उसमें मायड़ भाषा, मातृभाषा का बहुत अच्छा पुरजोर उसको स्थान दिया गया है। और क्योंकि रचनात्मकता जो है वो मातृभाषा से, जैसे आपने कहा, उत्पन्न होती है। और कहीं न कहीं भारतीय मनुष्य में, जैसा आपने कहा कि लेकिन एक अनुवांशिक गुण है, कुछ एक विषयों में हम बहुत ज्यादा अच्छा कर सकते हैं, और गणित भी उसमें से एक है। और जो एक आप बात कह रहे थे, स्थापत्य कला, जो हमारे मंदिरों का स्थापत्य है या बात है, विश्व में और कहीं किसी के पास में उस तरह का स्थापत्य न पहले था न आज है। तो ये भी एक बड़ा विज्ञान है, संगीत का और संस्कृति का तो है ही है। लेकिन मैं जो अपना मुख्य बिंदु जो है जिसको रेखांकित 2-4 मिनट में करना चाहूंगा कि जो मायड़ भाषा, मातृभाषा का जो है, मैं समझता हूं कि इसमें न केवल सरकार की बल्कि समाज की भी बराबर भागीदारी होना अत्यावश्यक है, वरना कुछ नहीं होगा। मैं एक उदाहरण दूंगा। राजस्थानी भाषा का एक शब्दकोश है, और वो शब्दकोश करीब 7,706 पृष्ठ है और 2.25 लाख शब्द है। और मैं ये भी बताना चाहूंगा कि राजस्थानी भाषा जो है, उनके शब्दकोश में शब्दों की संख्या हिंदी से अधिक है। और डिंगल और पिंगल, और फिर बाद में राजस्थानी और गुजराती और मालवी, और अब उसमें कई विषय में नहीं जाना चाहूंगा। लेकिन हमने एक प्रयोग शुरू किया कि अब जो नई शिक्षा नीति आई है और भाषा लगभग मृत प्राय हो गई, कोई मैगजीन नहीं, सिर्फ 2 विश्वविद्यालय में राजस्थानी पढ़ाई जाती है। तो विचार ये आया कि अगर जब तक हम राजस्थानी भाषा का डिजिटीकरण नहीं करेंगे, ये भाषा आज के युग में नहीं बढ़ पाएगी, क्योंकि अभी आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस ये वो और सब कुछ व्याकरण के साथ में, और शोधार्थियों के लिए, विद्यार्थियों के लिए, पाठकों के लिए, सबके लिए बहुत आवश्यक है। और मैं एक छोटा मोटा एनजीओ चलाता हूं, तो हमने उसके एक रूपरेखा कार्य शुरू किया, और शुरू करने में हमने कई बाधाएं आई, लेकिन हमने कहा कि इतना बड़ा विषय है, नई एजुकेशन पॉलिसी आई है, और सरकारें जो है निश्चित रूप से इसको तो हाथों हाथ ले लेगी। हम राजस्थान सरकार के पास गए, उन्होंने कहा नहीं हमारे पास में इसके लिए कोई सपोर्ट नहीं है, और आप पहले तो 3-4 विभागों में हम घूमे, और अंत में उसका सार ये निकला कि राजस्थान सरकार ने हाथ खड़े कर दिए। फिर हमें राजस्थान के एक IAS हैं जो संस्कृति मंत्रालय में सचिव है, वो मेरे को जानते हैं, तो हमें किसी का संस्कृति मंत्रालय से बात करें, तो हम उनसे बात किया, तो उन्होंने भी जो है एक से दूसरे से तीसरे विभाग भेजा, और साहित्य परिषद आते आते उन्होंने कहा नहीं, राजस्थानी के लिए हम कोई नहीं, हिंदी के लिए फिर भी अगर आप करें तो हम करेंगे, लेकिन राजस्थानी के लिए कोई प्रावधान ही नहीं है ना। अब हमने अपने रिसोर्सेज से एक वेबसाइट बनाया, और उसमें उसका जो अनुवाद के पहला खंड जो है वो rajsabadkosh.com करके, और उसमें हमने शुरू किया काम। और जैसे ही अपलोड हुआ, हमारे पास 2 संस्थान आए, हमारे पास यूनेस्को आया और हमारे पास शिकागो यूनिवर्सिटी आया। शिकागो यूनिवर्सिटी में एक दक्षिण एशियाई भाषाओं का विभाग है, और वहां पे कुछ भारतीय हैं और 2 गोरे भी हैं, और वो इतनी शुद्ध राजस्थानी बोलते हैं, और उनको इतना ज्ञान है, मैं खैर वो तो पढ़ के हो गया। विषय ये नहीं है, विषय ये है कि उन्होंने न केवल हमें सपोर्ट करने की कहा, सुओ मोटो उन्होंने कहा कि हम आपके इस प्रकल्प में जितना भी पैसा लगेगा हम खर्च करेंगे, और पहले क्रम में उन्होंने 16 लाख रुपए हमें देना तय हुआ। हमारे एक मेमोरेंडम ऑफ अंडरस्टैंडिंग हुआ उनसे। यूनेस्को ने हमें कहा कि देखिए आप डिजिटाइज तो करोगे, लेकिन आपको इसको वैश्विक सारी भाषाओं से जोड़ने की आवश्यकता है, और अगर जोड़ेंगे नहीं तो फिर वही रह जाएगी। और क्योंकि आप राजस्थानी को यूरोपियन लैंग्वेज हो, अफ्रीकन लैंग्वेज हो, या साउथ लैटिन अमेरिकन लैंग्वेज हो, या इन सब के साथ में कैसे कनेक्ट करोगे। और उन्होंने कहा कि हम जो है, हमारे पास में एक खंड है, प्रकल्प है, जिसमें हम सभी भाषाओं को जोड़ते हैं, और हम आपसे जो है गठबंधन करना चाहते हैं। जैसे ही आपका ये होता है, और तो उसमें कि देवनागरी के जो अधिकांश शब्द हमारे देवनागरी से ही हैं, देवनागरी के शब्द जो है वो आप ट्रांसलेट कर पाएंगे, और किसी भाषा से दोनों तरीके से कर पाएंगे। कहने का तात्पर्य यह है कि विश्व हमारी तरफ देख रहा है, लेकिन हमारी इच्छा शक्तियों में कहीं न कहीं कोई न कोई उछाल लाने की आवश्यकता है, चाहे वो सामाजिक स्तर पर हो, चाहे वो सरकारी स्तर पर हो, चाहे वो नॉन गवर्नमेंटल ऑर्गेनाइजेशन के स्तर पर हो। और दूसरा विषय जो है, आपने बहुत अच्छे तरीके से उठाया कि विज्ञान और उद्योग का जो गठबंधन है और जो जुड़ाव है, वो मैं कहूँगा कि लगभग नगण्य है आज भी। अब जाकर के कुछ प्रयास CSIR ने शुरू किए, या DRDO ने भी शुरू किए, कुछ कर रहे हैं, लेकिन इसमें बहुत कुछ करने की आवश्यकता है। और जो उद्योग भी जो है, कहीं न कहीं CSR के माध्यम से अगर उनके पास जाओ कि हम इस पे ये हमें संसाधन चाहिए, इन्वेस्टमेंट चाहिए, तो वो अपने उनको रास नहीं आता है। वो थोड़ा जो पॉलिश वाले, जहाँ कुछ दिखे इमीडिएटली, ऐसे विषयों को ही फंड्स देते हैं। तो ये 2-3 विषय जो हैं, मैं समझता हूँ कि आपने जिस प्रकार रेखांकित किए हैं विषय, और मैं आपको बहुत बहुत साधुवाद देना चाहता हूँ, और साधुवाद विज्ञान प्रसार और जो विज्ञान भारती अमृत महोत्सव के माध्यम से ये जो हम कर रहे हैं, मैं समझता हूँ ये संदेश बहुत दूर तक जाएगा। धन्यवाद। जय हिंद, जय भारत।
नमस्कार। नमस्कार।
Thank you so much, sir. So now we will proceed for the vote of thanks. It gives me immense pleasure to actually thank you all, because I can't thank you. It was such a pleasure to hear you, sir, And both of you, it was like such an engrossing conversation. I didn't realize that we've already passed 1.5 hours. And so I can't thank you enough. So to be formal now, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me immense pleasure to deliver the vote of thanks for the event today. I'll start with first our speaker and guest of honor. Sir, thank you so much. It was the most engaging talk, most interesting, and totally relevant to what is going on in India. Sir, Dr. Rathore, sir, it was a pleasure to hear you speak about the importance of all the work that you're doing, whether in Rajasthan, and your views on what Indian education should be and what the importance of regional languages is. Thank you so much. My thanks also to Dr. Ranjana Agarwal for organizing the program and for being the secretary for this. Dr. Ruchir Gupta, Manya Jain Sasbudde ji, all the audiences of Vigyan Bharati who have been listening to this channel, all the members of the VIBA who have been there and who have been listening to this and are really passionate about this. There are so many comments in the chat box, I can't tell you. All praises for you, sir, Professor Kak, and to everyone else and to the support that we've got from the technical team. I thank you all for being here, for providing support for the event, and for just making this event a success. Thank you so much. Namaskar. So, how does the live end? I think we just